My boyfriend is upset that I'd consider breaking my vegetarianism for a week long. My boyfriend is upset that I'd consider breaking my vegetarianism for a week-long trip to Japan. How should I navigate this original post? My boyfriend is upset that I'd consider breaking my vegetarianism during a week-long trip to Japan. I 34F have been vegetarian for about 4 years ago. My boyfriend, 34M, is a meat lover. He is an excellent cook, and he loves steak and other types of meat. He's never asked me to start eating meat. I have never asked him to stop eating meat. I don't care what he eats. It's 100% his. And everyone else's choice. I don't talk about being vegetarian, don't promote it, and I try to figure out my own food if I need to so I don't inconvenience others. Sometimes it's hard to find a restaurant with a vegetarian choice besides a side salad, so I'll do the legwork to find a restaurant everyone will like. My choice to be vegetarian hasn't seemed to be an issue or cause any big inconvenience, but maybe I'm wrong about going on vacation with my boyfriend's family for a week. His mom revised her risotto recipe to use veggie broth instead of chicken broth so I could eat it. I didn't ask, I think. My boyfriend suggested it to her. I was really appreciative when my boyfriend and I went on vacation for a week. We both looked up restaurants that would have a veg option for me. We mostly ate at seafood places because of where we were vacationing, and I managed to find a veggie burger or something like that at most places I take. I have a work trip to Japan coming up soon. I told my boyfriend I was considering eating meat during that week so I can fully experience the culture and food. That means sushi, wagyu, ramen, things like that. I'm not sure if I can actually get myself to eat meat during the trip because I think I'll feel guilty about it. Is my choice to be veg because I feel bad for how animals are raised and treated, farmed, and the nature of how they're usually killed. I know I can get humanely raised meat, but I choose to abstain altogether. I miss sushi and steak the most, but again I abstain from my boyfriend's. He is upset that I would consider breaking vegetarianism for this week-long trip, but I wouldn't consider breaking vegetarianism to have a steak with him. It makes him feel like he's not worth it. It makes him feel like the trip and the coworkers I'm going on the trip with are more important than him. I know he bonds over sharing food with people. He likes to cook for other people and he's never been able to cook a steak for me, and we've never been able to share a steak dinner together. We've gone to steakhouses before, but I just eat whatever else they have. It's not the same as us both enjoying a steak. He also said that all the effort to accommodate me being vegetarian seems like a waste. Now his mom going out of her way to make the risotto without chicken broth, looking up restaurants where I can eat something besides a salad. He is cooking stir-fry or other dishes and leaving the meat separated on the flat-top grill until I serve myself the veggies, and then after that he combines it all together with the meat, things like that. Me not being able to enjoy the best shrimp he's ever had on our vacation together. He was to the point of tears over us not being able to eat a steak together. I understand. It would make him feel bad that I'd consider eating meat on the trip, but I haven't offered to eat a steak with him. I feel terrible for making him feel this way and making him feel less important or less worthy. I apologized for this and apologized for making him feel this way. I told him that's not it. It's not that he's not worthy, that this trip is probably once in a lifetime, and I'm afraid that if I have a steak here at home with him I'm concerned it'll become a slippery slope. I told him I don't want to stop being vegetarian. How do I navigate this? Editing to add, when he told me how he felt about this, I listened and apologized for making him feel so poorly and validated him. I understand why he feels bad, and I should have thought about how this might go before I said it, that I'm considering eating meat on the trip, out loud during the conversation. I thanked him for telling me how he was feeling and thanked him for telling me how important that would be to him. So I offered to have a steak with him and me also let him know I don't want it to become a regular thing because I prefer to stay vegetarian, or mostly vegetarian I guess, since having steak with him wouldn't be vegetarian. I know sharing meals together is important to him. It's also important to me. What I did not know, however, is that he was so badly wanting to have a steak together where I eat it too. When he cooks meat I always comment on how good it looks and smells, and he has said before, I wish you could taste this. In hindsight, that comment from him was probably hinting at him wishing I'd offer to eat a steak with him. He hasn't asked me, hey, can you please eat a steak with me tonight, or would you ever consider eating meat with me or for me, if he asked me those questions. And I said no. And then I said I'm considering eating meat in Japan. That would be a different conversation. I haven't rejected him that way, but I also haven't offered to eat steak with him either. Until this conversation came up, I didn't know this specific thing was something he wanted so badly. I thought, because he eats meat as much as he wants, and we eat many meals together, that he was satisfied in this area. We've never been to a vegetarian restaurant together. I try to make my vegetarianism as small as possible. I don't want it to be a thing. I bring food to his house. I get a side salad or kids grilled cheese at restaurants that don't have any other veg options. I don't make it a big deal. I completely understand why he feels bad. That's not what this post is about. I'm just wondering how to best move forward. I also just told him I was considering eating meat on that trip without thinking about it. At first I didn't think about how he'd feel. He'd feel slighted. I didn't think about how I'd feel guilty and anxious about the thought of actually going through with eating meat, etc. When we talked about it, I brought up that I'll have to slowly incorporate meat into my diet leading up to us having a steak together or going to Japan. If I choose to eat meat on that trip, I know that's a thing. Considering how anxious I feel about actually thinking more about going through with eating meat, I think it's best for me to just not eat meat on the trip. But now I still have to figure out how to address the topic with my boyfriend, because now I know he wants me to eat steak with him. And I offered to do that for him. Thanks for all the feedback, everyone. Update. Here's what happened. This is going to be really long. During the 2 weeks leading up to me leaving for Japan, we got into a couple of big arguments, and about 5 days before I left, he told me he can't do it anymore. He can't take all the arguing. He's exhausted. I don't take responsibility for the things I'm doing wrong, and all I do is focus on what he's doing wrong. I don't talk enough about the things that I need to fix about myself. I don't talk about my insecurities enough, and I don't take enough responsibility for the ways I communicate poorly and how that makes us fight. A little more context about the arguments. Argument 1: we had a talk one Sunday about how I was feeling. He could tell I was down, and I told him I was feeling lonely. He asked how else I'd been feeling lately, and I shared that I've also been conflicted about some work stuff and some family and friend stuff. We didn't talk about loneliness, just about the other things. He went into solution mode and was emotionless about. It wasn't what I needed, but I went through that process with him first, since he seemed determined to get to the bottom of it. Throughout the discussion, a couple of things rubbed me the wrong way. First, he told me he doesn't think I actually feel that way, and second, there was no empathy. When he was done leading that discussion, he asked me how I felt. I told him poorly. The first thing I shared is that it's disheartening when he asks me how I feel. I tell him how I feel, and then he replies with, "I don't think you feel that way." This isn't the first time. This happened other times when he's asked me how I feel or what I think about something. He's told me, "I don't believe you. I don't think you feel that way. It doesn't make sense to feel that way. I think you feel like that because of XYZ, not because of the reason I gave." The second thing I shared is that I would have liked him to not only focus on analyzing the situation and to say something empathetic like, that you feel so lonely. I'm sorry to hear that. What's going on?" I told him I appreciated the solution mode discussion and that helped, and I also needed some empathy. He got quiet and his body language changed. I asked him if he's upset. He firmly replied, "Yeah, I'm upset." I asked why, and he said, "Because I'm only focusing on the things he did wrong. He tried so hard to handle the situation well, and he did everything else right. But all I told him is what he did wrong." I reminded him he did other things right. And I referenced back to other conversations where he has shared a grievance with me, and I haven't given him what he wanted at the moment. He wanted more empathy or more softness, for example, and he's quick to point it out and tell me what I'm not doing right and what he needs from me. And this conversation kind of ended after that. I brought it up again a week or so later, and he said sorry for not handling the argument well. 2. He told me he was making plans to watch a horror movie with his friend Aaron. They periodically watch movies together, just the two of them, and that's fine by me. However, this made me feel insecure this time, because I don't feel like he gets excited to make plans with me, really tries to make or initiate plans with me besides just hanging out at home or something, or saying we should go to the brunch place we like nearly every weekend anyway. I got really quiet and started tearing up in the moment, and I was trying to process how I felt and figure out if it's worth bringing up or if I just need to handle it on my own and not tell him how I was feeling, because I know it's an insecurity of mine. He asked me what's wrong, and I decided this is benign enough to talk about how I told him this made me feel really insecure. He told me it doesn't make sense for me to feel that way. Shouldn't feel that way, and he's never done anything to make me feel that way. I explained myself and explained why he loves horror movies, and I want him to want to share that with me, and I feel insecure about it. If the rest of our relationship was healthy, this probably would not have made me feel poorly, but I had been feeling not really wanted for a while, so this kind of tipped the scale. He persisted that it doesn't make sense for me to feel this way and listed reasons why I shouldn't feel that way. Eventually he said okay, and he understood what I was saying. He asked me if I felt hurt, and I said yeah, I think so. Then he wanted a chance to say his perspective. He went right into how it doesn't make sense for me to feel that way, why I shouldn't feel that way, and that he's never done anything to make me feel that way. I got so frustrated because that contradicted what I thought we just resolved. When he said he understood my feelings, he got upset because I was bothered about it again after I just told him I felt hurt. He said he wanted softness from me, and I wasn't receiving him well. We went back and forth after that, trying to explain why his responses to me bothering me, and him insisting the same things again. It never got resolved. Argument 3: I was leaving for Japan on a Friday night. My flight was at like 7 p.m. That same day he was going to drive about an hour away to spend the weekend with his best friend. We talked a few weeks prior, and I said I wasn't going to work that day, so I could prepare for the trip, and we agreed we'd hang out that day but never firmed up any plans or times. We went out to dinner, and I asked him what time he was planning to leave on Friday to drive to his friend's house. It was a genuine question with no feelings or anything attached. He replied between 3 and 5 p.m. I don't know what I was expecting him to say, but when he told me 3:05, I realized I felt bad, because I wanted him to *1 to spend that time with me leading up to my flight and maybe take me to the airport or something. I never expressed this to him previously. We didn't talk about it yet. In that moment I told him I felt unconsidered, and I wished he would have considered me up, because I should have told him I wanted to hang out leading up to my flight instead of saying I felt unconsidered. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have felt comfortable telling him that, because it would interfere with his friend time and change his plans. I'm not sure how he would have received that. Maybe well, maybe not. He got really upset. I tried explaining why I felt unconsidered, and immediately his body language changed. He pushed himself back in his chair a little, made the smirk, scoffed, and started interrupting me. I got frustrated, and he told him not to interrupt me when I was trying to explain my feelings, and I can see he's about to get defensive. I was definitely triggered by his change in demeanor and his attempt to interrupt me. I thought to myself, not again. Not this time. Stand up. for yourself and make sure you get to share your feelings." He got even more upset that I assumed he was going to get defensive, and he got upset I wouldn't let him interrupt me. He said he did consider me. His plan to leave between 3 and 5 wasn't firm, and if I just let him interrupt me, this big fight wouldn't have happened. He said, "My feelings weren't appropriate because they were based on an incorrect assumption. I made the assumption I made was that he didn't consider me and his plans to leave between 3 and 5 were firm." He told me he just pulled that time frame out of the air, and it wasn't firm. He didn't have dinner plans with his friend yet, so it was all flexible when he explained. I thanked him for explaining it himself. I apologized for assuming he didn't consider me, and I told him I see his perspective. He was really upset with me though, so he explained again why what I did wasn't okay. It wasn't okay that 1, I assumed he didn't consider me. 2, I said I wish you would have considered me. 3, I called out his body language, and 4, I assumed he was going to get defensive. Side note, me saying "I wish you would" to him is a no-no because it makes him feel awful, so I have worked hard to not use that phrase with him. I failed this time. I explained that those were my feelings based on the information I had at the time, and even though they were based on wrong information, it's still okay for me to tell him how I feel first, and then he can set the record straight. Then he can say something like, "Oh, these plans aren't actually firm. Sorry, you didn't feel considered. The plans are flexible." And I can say, "Okay, sorry for assuming that I'd like to hang out until I go to the airport." That didn't work for him. He insisted that if I just let him interrupt me, none of this would have happened. I ended up reiterating his pointing and apologizing 3 times. Also over the summer, something similar happened with the roles reversed. He assumed something incorrect, and he was upset about it, and I interrupted him to tell him what the correct information was, and he told me I need to hear him out first before I chime in with the correct information because his feelings are still his feelings, and they should be heard. It's hard to do, but I agreed. So I brought up that conversation as justification for why I should be allowed to tell him how I feel before he interrupts me. He still wanted to interrupt me because my assumption was wrong. Then he got upset that I changed my stance so quickly when he told me the plans were flexible. I apologized for assuming he didn't consider me, and I told him, "Okay, I understand that works for me." He said he feels crazy when this happens. When I feel bad about something, he explains his side, and then I say, "Okay, I understand," and I let my original feelings go, and I side with him. He said that I'm gaslighting him because it seems like a big deal to me. Then he gets worked up, and then I back down. I tried to explain that it's normal and healthy for someone to be told new information and then take that information into consideration and change their approach. It's healthy for me to hear him out and say, "Yeah, I made an assumption, and I shouldn't feel bad about this anymore." Anyway, he was really upset with me all night. The whole fight was because of my poor communication. When we woke up the next morning, I thought he was going to apologize to me. Apparently he thought I was going to apologize to him. That's when he told me it's over. TL.dr. He broke up with me. I'm back from Japan. Work trip. I didn't eat meat or seafood. On the trip I did have some soups made with fish broth since that was tough to avoid, and that made me feel sick, but overall, it went very well. I'm struggling now with the breakup. Now to the next story. Story 2. Am I the one for kicking out my dad after he said he couldn't afford to feed me anymore? Original post throwaway. Here's the backstory. 28. I got my own house now, moved out at 18. Not really by choice. My dad basically pushed me out. Our relationship's been rocky since then. He's always been a huge drinker and smoker, which caused plenty of issues. Back then, fast forward, he lost his house a couple of months ago and didn't keep up with loan payments, so he calls me up, says he needs a place to stay while he gets back on his feet. I laid out a few ground rules. Either pay rent of $400 or cover groceries about $12.50, $300, and absolutely no smoking in the house. He laughs, says I'm your father. I shouldn't have to pay, but I don't budge, so he reluctantly agrees to buy groceries from the moment he moves in. It's just one problem after another, leaves a mess everywhere, doesn't clean up, smokes inside even though I made it clear that's a no-go, and drinks like there's no tomorrow. Then one day I have a girl over, and he just has this meltdown over it. So I tell him, listen, if he can't respect my space, he'll have to find somewhere else to stay. Things settle for a bit, but last week he hit me with, I don't have the money to buy groceries this month. I'm like, why? He says, well, you eat a lot, and admits he spent all his cash on smokes and drinks. That was it. For me, I was done with him acting like he owned the place, done with the flashbacks to dealing with him as a teen. I told him to pack up and leave, so I set clear boundaries. He didn't follow through. Edit. I never thought my post would garner so many reactions. I'm glad I'm not TA, and thank you all for your support. I'd like to clear out a few things. No, we didn't have a formal contract when he moved in. It was base. Kicking him out won't be easy, as police don't tend to offer much support to a son in relation to the father. The societal response is that a son should take care of his old parents. This was one of the reasons I agreed to take him in, like, if I could do something good for him, maybe he'd change his view about me. The feeling of being validated by my own dad after years of neglect was strong. I see now how foolish it was to take him in. How would I get him out? If he refuses to leave, he would go out to buy his supplies. I'd change locks the moment he leaves and go out too. If he breaks anything, then it's cop time. AA has no Consensus bot oop was NTA relevant comments. Commenter 1 NTA his I shouldn't have to pay showed his respect for you before he even moved in. Give him a month's notice maybe, but that is as far as your charity should go. Oh, I gave him until the first week of November. The only things he actually needs to pack are his drinks and smokes. He had stored almost everything from his house in storage. Commenter 2. On NTA kick him out. Apparently losing his own house wasn't consequence enough for him to realize that he needs to change some things in his life, so as he disrespected your reasonable rules he needs to feel the consequences by losing the place he could stay again, and in case he gets family and friends involved, what inevitably will happen, you can tell everybody who says you should let him stay, that they are welcome to open their home for your dad and offer him to stay with them up. I'm already painted black. In front of most family members I don't know what they're going to tell me, which they haven't already said earlier. Lowell. Commenter 3 NTA. I'm guessing at some point he's used the phrase my house, my rules, and that's a sword that cuts both ways. Oh, he did? He most definitely did. Update. He moved out today. Sorry to disappoint y'all, but the process was surprisingly peaceful the day of the last post. My dad told me he needed to talk. I braced myself for what he said was totally unexpected and welcome for me. He said that he couldn't bear the disrespect I've shown him, and he was never going to contact me again. His words, you failed me as a son. I told him if he needed help in the future, he could contact me, but he must abide by some conditions. He scoffed and said he was leaving soon and didn't talk to me again. He left today. As I said earlier in the first post, he had little to pack and had most of his possessions in storage. He didn't tell me where he was going and didn't bid adieu. Neil, I was comfortable with it. A toxic part of my life was being erased. I'm feeling different. Kind of freedom that I haven't felt even after I left home. Where he goes now is none of my concern, although I would have liked to at least know where he's going. Oh well, this is the update. Maybe a bit disappointing for this sub, but I personally am very relieved how this played out. Thank you all for the advice and all the responses. This meant a lot. Back to lurking with my main account. Peace. Top comments. Commenter 1. We can only be thankful when the trash takes itself out. Great on your newfound peace. Commenter 2. Change the locks and monitor your credit history for a while. Better to be safe than sorry. Congrats, and I hope you make the list of your independence. Commenter 3. Actually, I'm glad that it was a peaceful exit. I'm even more glad of how you stood up for yourself and didn't fall for the okay doi tried to hit you with. You did a lot of growing to refuse to fit back into the box of being a child in regards to dealing with him, urine, and if he has a problem accepting and respecting that, then leaving was what he needed to do. And it's good that he did. Bravo. Editor's note marking this as concluded since O's father has moved out of the house and OOP also deleted the throwaway account.